There's something special about when a franchise you grew up with evolves into something fresh, something that still carries the spirit of what made it great, but with new life and energy. That's exactly what Royal Revolt Survivors feels like. It's not just another spin-off. It's a full-blown roguelite reinvention of a beloved universe, one that throws you straight into the chaos, the strategy, and the adrenaline of survival. At its core, this is a game about defending your kingdom, not from a few scattered enemies, but from an all-out invasion of corrupted forces that seem to multiply every second you stand still. You start small, surrounded, and fighting for your life, but every battle pushes you to grow stronger, smarter, and more relentless. And that's where Royal Revolt's legacy really comes through. It's not just about swinging swords and casting spells, it's about holding your ground when everything else falls apart. The first thing that hits you is the combat. It's fast, fluid, and unapologetically chaotic. The screen floods with enemies, and every second counts. You're dodging projectiles, chaining attacks, activating abilities, and collecting upgrades mid-fight, all while trying to stay alive just long enough to evolve into something unstoppable. It's the kind of gameplay that scratches that perfect roguelite itch. You always feel one run away from glory, and one mistake away from disaster. But the game doesn't stop at solo survival. This time, Royal Revolt Survivors brings multiplayer to the table, and it's not just an afterthought. Up to 4 players can dive into battle together, combining abilities, reviving each other mid-chaos, and trying to keep control as the battlefield erupts into madness. It's pure, unfiltered co-op energy, that mix of laughter, panic, and victory that makes every match unpredictable. What makes it work so well is that every warrior in the game feels distinct. The developers clearly put thought into making each one stand out, not just in design, but in playstyle. You've got heavy hitters that can tank hordes, ranged attackers that keep the pressure from afar, and support characters who can turn the tide when things get messy. There's a rhythm to mastering them, learning how to position, how to combo their skills, and how to adapt when the game decides to throw an entirely new kind of nightmare your way. And speaking of nightmare, the enemies here don't pull any punches. You'll face waves of creatures with different movement patterns and attacks that force you to rethink your approach on the fly. Just when you think you've found your groove, a boss fight lands and completely flips the script. Each one feels distinct, not just a big damage sponge, but a test of how well you've learned to read the game's flow. Progression, as expected from a roguelite, is where the addiction sets in. Each run earns you new upgrades, trinkets, and weapons that can completely change your strategy. Maybe one run you're stacking lightning damage and tearing through mobs like a storm. The next, you're focused on defense and cooldown reduction, building an unbreakable fortress of a hero. That endless experimentation, that drive to find the next powerful combo, is what keeps you saying, just one more run. And all of it's wrapped in that signature Royal Revolt charm. The world design is colorful and detailed, but it doesn't shy away from its darker tone. There's a real sense that your kingdom is at stake, that every arena you fight in is one piece of a crumbling world you're desperately trying to restore. The animation work and the lighting pull it together beautifully. It's not just pretty for the sake of it. The visuals enhance the chaos, making every explosion and combo feel cinematic. The game also leans into nostalgia without relying on it. Fans of the older Royal Revolt titles will instantly recognize familiar faces, but the story never feels like a retread. It's more like an all-star reunion. Your favorite heroes returning, older, tougher, and ready to fight one last war together. It's the kind of crossover energy that makes longtime players smile, while still being totally accessible for newcomers who've never touched the franchise before. What stands out most, though, is how confidently this game knows what it is. It's not trying to compete with every other roguelite on the market, it's carving out its own space with that blend of polished action, co-op mayhem, and heroic fantasy. It's fast-paced when it needs to be, but still gives you room to breathe, to think, to strategize. That balance is rare, and it's what gives Royal Revolt Survivors its identity. When you're deep in the fight, surrounded by chaos, allies shouting, spells flashing, and enemies closing in, that's when the game really shines. It's the feeling of barely holding on, of surviving by instinct, and of earning every victory. And when you finally clear a wave, collect that upgrade, and realize you've made it further than before, it hits that satisfying loop that keeps you locked in for hours. So whether you're here for the nostalgia, the challenge, or the sheer fun of surviving impossible odds with your friends, Royal Revolt Survivors delivers. It's an explosive, beautifully crafted experience that feels familiar and new all at once. a true revival of a beloved universe, rebuilt for players who crave both chaos and mastery. This is the next evolution of Royal Revolt, where legends rise, kingdoms fall, and only the strongest survive.
Sacrifice!